You'll see me doing it.
I love it.
All right. So, hello and welcome to the See You Try show. I know at a different time today, one of the things is that we wanted to sort of make room for this conversation. And I thought a lunchtime chat was a perfect opportunity. And Nicole from Uniting Pride is with me. And so we're going to have a conversation about her work and their work and about how sort of local and national issues are impacting here. But without further ado, a couple of commercials. The See You Try show is definitely available thanks to support from local funders. However, the views and the opinions of our guests are always their own. And we encourage you to join in with questions or curiosities. So if you have a question that you'd like to share, you can just go to the chat and do this. And then after the sort of conversation, if there are resources that we talk about, we always kind of go back and add them through our Facebook thread. So if there's something that comes up, if we get a question or if we need to follow up, we want to make sure that you can come back to this thread for further conversation. So without further ado, and I will apologize to Nicole publicly. Of course, way months in advance, I was like, okay, got to make sure I reach out to Nicole for June for Pride, and and then life happens, and then so many things were happening in the national discourse that it felt like waiting or not sort of being proactive for this discourse, this conversation felt like it was not an option. So I thank you for sort of being able to respond to a last minute request. Know that it was not an oversight. It was forever in my thoughts. But I thank you for being flexible. Can you introduce yourself just in case there might be a few people who haven't seen you or out and about or seen your work on social media?
Yeah. First of all, thank you for inviting me. I know we're not an afterthought because we have worked together. We have done stuff and we know each other. So I know that. So I appreciate the apology, but not needed from my end. So I am Nicole Friedman. My pronouns are she or they, and I am the Director of Operations for Uniting Pride of Champaign County, also known as the Up Center.
Yes. So say a little bit more, because you might, for some people, might be a newer face or more of a public face. Tell us a little bit about your work with the Up Center and maybe explain what the Up Center is, in case there are a few people who don't know what the work is.
Yeah. So Uniting Pride of Champaign County is the LGBTQ plus resource center that exists here in our area. Now, we are called of Champaign County, and obviously a large portion of our work is around Champaign County, but there are only 3 resource centers in all of downstate Illinois.
Wow.
When you get south of the Chicagoland area, there's us, and then there's the Phoenix Center to Springfield, and there's the Rainbow Cafe down in Carbondale. So we
Wow.
regularly do work throughout Central Illinois, especially East Central Illinois. And of course, we partner with those wonderful organizations and other amazing organizations doing incredible work. But we are the only resource center of our kind, serving a very large portion of folks. And the reality is that things are very difficult in the world right now for the LGBTQ plus community. So our work spans quite a lot of different areas, but we have 4 main buckets of work. Folks may know about our big Pride Fest in the fall, the big Pride Parade and Fair that we throw. That's actually what the organization was founded around in 2009. The success of that quickly highlighted the amount of work and the amount of need in the community. So we became a year-round nonprofit organization, and we now have other areas of work. We do a lot more events and programs besides Pride Fest. Lots of June Pride programming going on right now. We have our Teen Queer Prom. We have other various little events that go on throughout the year, including our Valentine's Day Love Fest show, and other fun stuff. And then we also have our support and social groups, which is probably our second largest piece of programming outside of the community events. We held over 250 meetings last year throughout the entire age range and lifespan, from kids all the way up into our community elders. And that is really serving a need because our community is sadly faces hardship to access to healthcare, in particular mental health care. So having a space for support groups really can close some of that gap, although not nearly enough. Another big piece of work that we do is educational training. It's probably my favorite part of my job. I
Mhm.
worked in education for a long time, and I love getting in front of a group of folks and teaching a little bit of LGBTQ plus cultural competency. And we'll go anywhere: for-profit businesses, government agencies, nonprofits, schools. Excuse me, faith groups or hobby groups, or really anybody who will stand still long enough. I'm gonna get you some education.
Gotcha.
Yeah. And then the last component of work that we have is advocacy. And, we had always done ad hoc advocacy where needs came up, but unfortunately, the need has grown significantly. The last 3 years in a row have broken records for the most anti-LGBTQ plus legislation ever presented and passed in the history of the United States.
Okay.
2021 shattered a record, 2022 shattered a record, and now in just the first 6 months of 2023, we're over 500 pieces of legislation, and we've already broken 2022's record.
Wow. Okay, so I want to talk about each of these because I think it's super important. But maybe the first thing that I think always comes up when you think about any affinity group or organization is why the need and why do you exist, right? That is sort of at the core, and that has a long, complicated history. But I think maybe you could share some of, I know a lot of people might think Champaign County is a college town. It's sort of liberal and progressive. Why would we need an up center? So go.
Wow. Why? There are a lot of whys. The LGBTQ plus community has never enjoyed full access to civil liberties, civil rights, and lived in a world of anti-discrimination. It's never been true in our society. So the need has existed forever. What kind of need has ebbed and flowed over the years, of course, because it is in reaction to society. We always like to say that our number one goal is to put ourselves out of business, because then there'd be no more need. Wouldn't that be lovely if we were all just sitting over at the Up Center board? But
I have a dream, right?
Right. I'm sure your goal is the same. But unfortunately, of course, it's going the other direction. There was a period of time where we were experiencing a lot of progress, right? We're seeing a lot of access to civil liberties and civil rights. Only 8 years ago, we finally got marriage equality. We were seeing increases in anti-discrimination policies in work, in government institutions, in various stages, in various states, in various parts of the country, adoption rights, healthcare, inheritance, all these areas that impact as far as legalities are concerned. And of course, the tide was turning culturally as well, right? I always talk about, or at least I have in the last couple of years, how, I'm not as young as I look, right? So I've been doing this work for a minute, and the cheer for a long time when I was in my, early 20s was, we're here, we're queer, get used to it, right? We'd go to protests and we'd say that. And then it kind of started to feel like that didn't need to be said anymore.
Yeah.
But we're back.
Yeah.
We're back to needing to say it.
Yeah.
Our mere existence is being challenged.
Yeah.
Just the right to exist in public is not just being challenged socially, but it's being challenged legally.
And politically, yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Don't say gay bills, bathroom bans, book bans, medical, barring people from life-saving medical health care. I mean, I always knew it was a possibility. We always knew. Cannot say I'm surprised. But it took us by surprise how quickly it turned, how quickly it shifted, how quickly these laws have gotten passed, and how quickly the civic sentiment has shifted.
Yeah. And and I hope we can talk about what the local impact is. And I'm also aware, because we talk about trauma all day long, that even though legislatively and politically, there has always culturally been stigma and marginalization and structural inequality and feelings of, and so marginalization where people have not felt like, so young people have felt like they can't be themselves at home or with their families. There's been social and cultural pressures. And so, although I know there felt like a time where, you could have gay couples on TV and in commercials, in people's lived experience where they could feel like they could have a place where you could show up authentically and be loved and appreciated and affirmed and validated for who you love and how you show up. We've never had a place. And so creating communities of belonging or appreciation or affiliation have just been essential for people's sort of mental health, well-being, and purpose. And so, I know Mama Bears is showing at the end at the month, and I'm going to have Kim on. But I just want to remind folks, if, I know sometimes it's hard to imagine, because if you are somebody who's open and affirming or a part of congregation or community, you might not be aware of just how complicated. It's why the data talks about higher rates of depression and suicidal ideation. It's not because there's something inherently flawed. It is because there are so much oppression, and it's a response to not feeling like you can be seen, heard, and affirmed. And so I know when you see the celebratory things, it seems like that's the whole point. But I always want to remind people that if you talk to people and walk through their stories, there's a quote: "It's not been a crystal stair," and it's complicated, right?
Yeah, I mean, you're hitting on so many things. I love it. I'm very grateful to the Trevor Project, and if folks don't know what that is, please look that up. It's a national.
And we'll make sure that information gets available.
Yeah.
Okay.
Put the link in the thing,
We'll do that.
But yeah, they are a national organization dedicated to, in particular, mental health and lowering suicide ideation in LGBTQ plus youth. And they've put a ton of time, energy, and funds into legitimate studies. So we have the data now, which is helpful in getting people to understand the scope of the problem. Suicide is the second or third leading cause of death in children in this country, depending on how you break down age, which is already a mental health crisis of epic proportions. And I don't know why that is not
like every single day. Yeah.
And then you learn that LGBTQ plus children are 50% nearly, depending on how you break it down, more likely than non-queer kids to seriously consider, make a plan, and attempt suicide. And the studies go farther to exactly the point you made, which is that it's not because they are merely queer.
Yeah.
It goes directly to the root cause, which is that the bullying, the not feeling supported in their families and their communities, the being taught there is something fundamentally wrong with who they are at their core. And we know this because when a young person gets that kind of support, when they even have one adult in their life that is affirming and supportive and loving, that suicide risk is reduced by half. By half. It literally takes a teeny amount of effort by the adults around these kids to save lives. I hear sometimes from people, what's the big deal? Whatever, who cares? Lighten up, and I get where that comes from. It's not understanding and live experience. I get it. But I hope you can hear that the big deal is that you could literally save a child's life by making small efforts to support, love, and affirm them.
Yes. And so it is why there is both the celebratory things like pride and events and parties, right? But there's also the support groups and the structural supports and also the advocacy, right? So because those things are so essential for people's mental health and well-being. And then I also know you did mention this, but let's keep talking, that in addition to providing support for people who are queer across the diaspora and lifespan, you also provide support for parents and caregivers and allies, because that is also something that is a part of the journey, right? So sometimes being a parent is complex and complicated. I know some people have heard my story. So my daughter is queer, and it's super funny, because I was telling a friend this when she came out. I'm going to try to say this delicately, but when she came out, she was really nervous about telling me. And she's somebody who went to her first Pride event at 18 months. So we've always, right, we open an affirming church, definitely always surrounded godparents. I mean, like, so, but the fact that she thought like that somehow that I would still not necessarily be accepting and affirming just even tells you something about like the internalized fear or the stigmatization or all of those things. So even if you are somebody who is part of a community that's open and affirming, there's still that fear. There's still those internalized or externalized messages from faith communities or other communities that can make it uncertain. And then again, as a parent, needing to sort of have conversations like, how do I talk about if I like your partner or not without you feeling like it's a conversation about your sexual orientation or gender identity? It's like, we could actually have two separate conversations, right? But when you're feeling like worried about stigma and marginalization, it's just so tenuous and tentative. So I know some of the work that you're doing is so important across the whole spectrum of support that we have, that people need.
First of all, thank you for sharing your personal story. I think that matters because I think there are people out there who don't always connect to some of this, right? They maybe don't think it impacts them directly. And when you know someone who's struggled, who's gone through some of these things, it changes the impact of it, right? Or you see a little bit of yourself in someone else's personal story and you can relate, and that matters. So Karen, thank you sincerely for sharing your story. But I think you're speaking to what, you asked a little bit and we didn't get to touch on it too much, but but the local impact, right? Because people will say to me, okay, Nicole, but we're not passing these laws here. We're not, banning books in our Champaign-Urbana schools. We're not, et cetera, et cetera. But, another piece of this data that we've now learned is that it does not actually matter whether those kids are directly impacted by the laws or someone in their house is saying these things. It is because of social media and nonstop mainstream media and, the constant bombardment of it, that it doesn't matter if it's happening literally right in your house. The messages are getting through to every single child and the fear is still there. And you see so many instances of people you thought were progressive or open-minded react poorly, it's easy to have fear that even though the people around you have shown you love, that maybe they would be that person too. And you just don't know until it happens. And it's exhausting how much fear queer people live with on a daily basis. It is not an on-off thing. It is in every scenario. It is in every situation. Anytime someone asks me, oh, what do you do for a living? I have to wonder, how are they going to receive this information?
Yes.
Anytime you get into a new group of people and you have to introduce yourself in some way and you have to share about your personal life, your family, your identity, your pronouns, your situation, like any of that, you have to come out again. And you literally never know what the reaction will be. The fear is constant. And it doesn't matter if the fear call is not coming from inside the house.
Yeah, I mean, right. I love that you are pointing that out, just because I think people really don't attune to or pay attention to like just the social cultural impacts. Like when you ban a book or you hear people being really, like language around identity or belonging or grooming or all of those things, even a response that says I am not that still means that you are generating a response and having to respond to it. And I don't think that people realize that social pressure. And I want to say something, and this will probably be even more messy or confusing, but at least, I think there's lots of stigma and marginalization for people of color, right? Like I'm a Black-bodied woman, but at least like I know when you interact with me, like you see me and there's no unveiling, right? What I found is that individuals who are in the queer community sometimes because of like skin privilege or maybe gender identity privilege, people make one assumption and they'll be thinking they're having one conversation. And then when your more authentic expressions are out, then people go, oh, I didn't know. And that's almost sometimes even more complex because it feels like you're sort of treading through, landmines, never knowing which one that's going to go off. And I think that creates hypervigilance and more stress. And again, we're talking trauma all the time. Just that, oh my gosh, I don't know if I reveal that next level of my identity or my authentic expression, will you reject me? Will you receive me? If I'm working in your school or after school program, are you going to all of a sudden not believe that I can work with your kids? It's just a different experience.
Thanks for bringing that up. I mean, it is an extra, a little layer that exists for those of us who pass, right? We do not all pass, and
yeah, you're right, absolutely.
Many of us are outed walking in the room, but for those of us who are not, and this happens to me all the time, I mean, the number of times in my life when I've had people say to me, "Oh, you don't look queer," like, I'm like, what does that even mean? First of all, so like really? Yeah. So it's absolutely true that there's always this moment of like evaluating where my power will live. Could I advocate with more success by not outing myself, which is all kinds of complicated, right? Yeah. And like, is that even an okay thing to do in this? I mean, it's really difficult. It just adds that extra layer to it, right? And it's a reason why we talk to folks about how anyone who is not able to come out, is not ready to come out, or is only out in some components of their life, there's no judgment. None.
Yeah.
It is so fraught. It is so difficult. And it is constantly this decision we're making, this evaluation we're making of our safety. And we just don't know what it could yield. And it does add that layer to it that, obviously we exist in all races and identities and cultural and backgrounds and ethnicities as well, which of course, once you get into the intersectionality, well, you get into a whole other field too, right?
Absolutely. Except we won't talk log cabin and Republicans, but. Oh my God. Oh my God. Yeah. Oh no, right. We will save that for like offline conversation, which in this time, like always just blows like I don't even understand. Like it.
That's what I got to say about that. Oh goodness. But I did want to talk about something because you mentioned celebration, and you've mentioned it now a couple of times. And so I actually have an educational training on the history of the modern pride movement. I've been asked so many times, can you come and talk about LGBTQ history? And I'm like, honey, you could do a dissertation on that and still not be done. Like, how y'all want me to do like 45 minutes on
the greatest hits? and then Harvey Milk, and then HIV, and then
right.
Or do we go back to like, the Revolutionary War, right? Because, right?
Do we go back to the pharaohs? Do we go back to ancient Asian cultures? Do we go back to ancient African culture? Like, what? It's there throughout all of humanity. So where do we start? What do we talk about? Where do we go? So I've never been able to say yes to that. And then finally I realized, like, well, I could talk about a chunk, and I could talk about a chunk as it relates to our modern struggle. And so I decided to talk about the history of the modern pride movement. Because what I've discovered is that even members of the LGBTQ plus community don't even know what it really is, don't know where it started. They may have heard the word Stonewall. They might even think they know what it is, but there's actually a lot of myths out there that have been debunked that people still perpetrate as truth. But even if they know a little bit, they certainly don't know the full context of it, and they don't know why or how it is relevant to today, right? And this component of celebration is important, and it's a big thread in this talk that I do, because first of all, queer joy is radical. It always has been. Yeah. We have not been able to exist as our full selves without threat or ever, and so merely existing in joy as a radical act.
It's a revolutionary act. Yes.
It absolutely is. And it absolutely needs to be a component of any and every pride celebration. And it matters. it is still revolutionary. There are also ties to the history that I get, too long to talk to go into now. But if anyone wants to have me come in to do this talk, let me know.
Please.
But the reality is that Pride has always been a combination of openly celebrating our identity while advocating for our civil rights and our civil liberties and protesting the constant battles that we have always and continue to face today. It is not one thing.
Yeah.
And coming and showing up for the party is great.
Yeah.
Come, show up for the party, enjoy the party, have no shame in the party. Because like I said, that queer joy is radical. Come do it, love it, right? And then also try, especially if you're an ally, to make yourself aware of the other components, and why that act of joy is radical and what else is going on in our community that needs your time, your love, your attention, and your voice. We desperately need the voices of our allies and advocates right now. Never have we needed it more than we need it right now. It is, I mean, the sheer volume of misinformation and disinformation, and if you do not correct it, silence favors the oppressor, never
Absolutely.
the oppressor.
So let's make that shift. I also saw a comment, so I want to not miss it. Yeah. Okay. So thank you so much, Erica, for sharing and joining in. And if you have any questions and comments, continue to share because this is rich. So when I reached out, one of the things that you said, Nicole, was I want to make sure we talk about how some of these national issues, right? So the fourth pillar is this advocacy piece. You hear the education piece and the need for support and the need for celebration. But can we talk about the advocacy piece, like what you're seeing, what you're experiencing, and just in case people may not know, maybe give some examples and then we'll make it local. So what do you see and what are you hearing around national trends? Some people don't listen to the news, so maybe you might want to contextualize it.
Yeah, absolutely. So we are in the midst of what the UN calls an internal displacement crisis. That is a scenario in which refugees are fleeing their home communities because they are not safe, but they do not cross an international border. Mm-hmm. And I think unless you are literally engaged in this work or you happen to be a trans or gender diverse person or someone who has somebody like that in your family, you may have no awareness of the internal displacement crisis that we are facing in the United States right now. There is a mass exodus of trans, non-binary, gender diverse people or families from states where their mere existence is being made illegal.
You're going to hate me. I'm going to slow you down.
Sure.
Because I know that there are terms we use in community that can you explain, right? So people sometimes do not understand the difference between gender identity and sexual orientation. So like when we talk trans, right? If you can explain, because I think many people get a lot of that confused. So I'm sorry. I just think it would be really, really helpful so that,
Yeah. Appreciate it. I appreciate it because I do forget sometimes, right? I'm like talking. So sexual orientation is essentially who you love, your physical, romantic, and emotional attraction to other people. And your gender identity is your innermost core concept of self around gender. You might be a man, a woman, both, neither, anywhere on the gender spectrum. They are two entirely separate things. They are in no way connected. Everyone has both. Yeah. We all have a sexual orientation and we all have a gender identity. And it's important to note that gender identity and biological sex are different. Biological sex has to do with things measured in science, and gender identity has to do with, as I said, your innermost core concept of self, what's going on in your own head and heart. As much as I've tried to, I've yet to master mind reading, so I can't possibly know what's going on in someone else's head and heart. They can't know what's going on in mine. So it's deeply personal. And while I say it's different than biological sex, and I make that distinction very specifically, I don't make it to try to say that, to try to support the idea that biological sex is a binary, because it is not.
Yeah.
And medical science has documented that it's not a binary since at least the beginning of the 20th century. And now there are over 32 different ways in which a human being can be biologically not male, not female. And it's not statistically insignificant either, which is another thing people think. It's called intersex, and it is absolutely not this fallacy, this myth that gets perpetuated. And that myth of a biological sex binary is the basis for a lot of bigotry, a lot of discrimination, and indeed a lot of the laws that are getting passed. So if it's medically and scientifically false, what is that?
So I really wanted you to explain that, because I think when people hear laws, discrimination, medical discrimination, all of these things, particularly about trans children, trans youth, and then they hear it juxtaposed to conversations about, I don't know, hypothetically drag queens, right? Like, and they conflate those two together. It messes up the conversation, and it's not the same thing. And, there can be some intersectionality, but they're very divergent. So, okay. So now that hopefully people are clear that this is not, folks who so this is not just how I wardrobe myself, or if I decide to wear makeup or not wear makeup. This is not. So when we're talking about trans rights, we really are talking about people's rights to be authentically who they are, around identity, sense of being, both biological and psychological and emotional, and not just performative stuff. I just can't stress that enough. It could be one expression, but that is not at the core. So.
Yeah, thank you. We talk about gender identity and gender expression and how they are two very different things. And sometimes when people have a hard time understanding that, I'll bring up the example of a tomboy, which has always existed in the world. And, it's a woman or a girl who biologically, feels like a woman or girl, it psychologically feels like a woman or girl, but performs this act of masculinity, like in their expression of their presentation. There's absolutely nothing wrong with that, of course, and there never has been. And people are very accepting of that. And so
there should be, because again, we live in a really biased, bigoted world, and we start bullying and labeling and talking about places of belonging. Right? I know. Right?
All great points. All great points. But there is no mass movement to ban tomboys from existence, right?
Don't say that. There's probably somebody taking notes someplace.
Oh goodness, you're right. I shouldn't challenge them. Karen, you're so right. Anyway, I bring that up to explain to folks the difference between gender identity and gender expression, right? So there's external presentation of who you are, and then there's internal understanding of who you are. It's so true how people conflate the existence of trans, gender diverse, non-binary people with the existence of the art form of drag, which is such a strange conflation. I don't know, whatever.
I don't have existed for forever, and right. Yeah. So
in Shakespeare's day, they would not allow women on the stage. All of the men dressed in drag and played the women's parts. That was Shakespeare. They knew.
I know, because of a hodgepodge of things about thinking women were inferior, but let's keep going.
Yeah. It's so true. It's so true. So yes. So here we are back to the part I was getting to, and I was jumping ahead. So we are currently in a legal crisis, and there are an assortment of laws being passed. Yes, there are drag bans. And then there also are don't say gay bills, where they are banning even acknowledging your existence as someone who is a sexual or gender minority person to be discussed in educational environments. And then there are bans to accessing life-saving healthcare, gender affirming healthcare. And some of the states go farther than that. They will actually prosecute the parents or the doctors who try to help young people get that life-saving medical care. It's shockingly fascist. And as I said, not a surprise that this is happening, but a surprise at how quickly it escalated. How only in a couple of years, we went from protections, more and more protections being put in place, to outright fascism being legalized.
Yeah.
In not one state, not two states, a very large number of states. Many of the states surrounding Illinois are engaging in this kind of thing. And then we're seeing it throughout other parts of the country as well. And what this has created is an internal displacement crisis, a refugee crisis in the United States of America, where people are being forced to flee the communities in which they live because they fear literal jail time. And their children being taken away from them, being fired from their jobs, being banned from being able to work anywhere. I mean, all of these things exist. And thousands, probably tens of thousands of people are pouring out of these states and into states that are being protective and being proactive in those protections, Illinois being one of them.
Yeah.
So bringing it to the local conversation, for the first time ever in the last year, my organization has been getting direct outreach from people and families from other states, because they are these internal displacement refugees. They are searching for places that have protections. Illinois is that state. And then they are searching for places where wages are even remotely in line with cost of living. And central Illinois becomes an attractive location from that perspective. And then they discover that Champaign-Urbana has a resource center. And they start to wonder if this is a safe place to uproot their entire life, with most of them with nothing, because in particular, trans, non-binary, and gender diverse people are overrepresented in poverty, being underemployed or unemployed, and lack of access to higher education and resources of all kinds. And they're trying to find out. I mean, I literally get emails saying, is this a safe place to move? Is this a safe place to move my child to? I will truly never forget the first time I received an email like that. I mean, it was, I regularly have heartbreaking moments in the work that I do. That one turned a new corner for me. And it was harder and harder when they just kept coming. I had a dad stop into the center because he was coming to the community to look for a place to live for his kid. And he heard about us and he just stopped in. And he just needed to see us physically and to look in our faces and know that there are at least some portion of people in our community fighting for him and his kid and their lives. And I know that people who are not directly impacted by this do not understand the gravity of a genuine refugee crisis that we find ourselves in the United States of America. I know they don't understand it because I talk to people about it all the time, and they look at me like I have two heads.
Really?
And they don't want to believe it. And I get that. And they think we're being hyperbolic. They think we're being histrionic. And I shared the 10 stages of genocide with a "We Are Here" sign on it. We are flatly in stage 6, moving into stage 7 out of 10.
Wow.
There is an international organization called Genocide Watch, if people want to go find that. And there are other organizations that publish a lot of great information about the 10 stages of genocide. We are in a genocidal situation right now in the United States of America. And we are not at the beginning. We're coming up towards the end.
Okay, yeah. So I'm going to have you pause for a second. Because, right, first, hopefully people can hear the heartbreak and just the pain. And I think your emotional expression reveals just sort of the depth, right? And for people who have an empathetic response. But I do want you to continue to unpack this. So when you talk about this being a genocide, I want to kind of go through that. And I want to say a couple more things that might help people connect. One, if you are going to look at sort of national trends, where people are oppressing, so this is the first they came through. If we know the Holocaust poem, first they came and I didn't say anything, and then they came and then they came. But there are patterns. So in patterns where there was initial attacks against voting rights, and then there was, sort of the systematic marginalization and the taking away of women's rights, women's reproductive rights, women's right to, and then the next level of attack has been, and this, I guess, because explicitly talking about just the attack, marginalization, taking away bodily autonomy for women is not politically sexy. It became same policies, procedures, and practices, but then the trans community and the queer community have become sort of the next public-facing view of it. But I guess, folks, if you follow the law, all of these things go together. And so if you think like, oh, it is not going to be me or someone that I love or care about, where people are taking away rights, privilege, voice, choice, autonomy, and telling people that some people fit and other people don't. Some people have a right to be and other people don't. And not only do we have a right to sort of define who you can love and how you show up and how you can be, but then we can also cause actually real harm to you. So we can actually really hurt you. And it is so it's a part of a national trend. And I don't want people to sort of separate these issues because they, that there's all oppressions are intersecting. And it is why, Nicole, you mentioned, there's so much economic marginalization within the trans community. And then we know, right, from lots of conversations that were happening when we were having this summer of discontent around George Floyd, that, Black trans women are the most marginalized group of individuals, again, just because of those levels of oppression, right? So gender, being trans, being, having a gender identity that also has you marginalized. So just be thinking, I guess, if you're at home and again, you're thinking, oh, so maybe I came from a low wealth community, or maybe I'm not educated. I don't have a college degree. All of these are levels of oppression that show up in this moment that are really challenging your right to exist. And so when, Nicole, you talk about genocide, you are talking about sort of the structured endorsement by government officials, organizations, and communities that are designed to wipe out populations of people based on oppressive ideas. So keep talking. I just wanted to make sure that people were connecting the dots.
Thank you. And I appreciate the emotional pause as well while you were speaking. I appreciate that, but I could see that's what you were helping me do. And thank you. But you're absolutely right. When a group organizes to push forward genocidal acts, they always start with whatever the lowest hanging fruit is, and they just pick it off one by one by one. And you named so many of the steps and stages, and many of them were happening at the same time. And some of them were more successful more quickly than others. The insane over incarceration of BIPOC individuals to take away voting rights and their voice and their ability to engage in the community has been going on. And the constant bombardment of attacking women's rights, LGBTQ rights, we're now seeing it happen again to my Jewish community for some reason.
Absolutely. Right. Oh, yes. Yeah.
As a member of the Jewish community, it's not lost on me that this is all happening again. And my grandparents were Holocaust survivors. So, my family lived it. And, maybe makes it a little easier for me to see, maybe not, I don't know, but the siren is blaring, and it is absolutely what everything you said about, it's all of us. It is all of us, and it is all to centralize power in a very small minority of people, and they will pick everyone off one by one by one until they get it. And the only way to combat it is to come together, to work as a coalition against all of this. And I have to say, I'm so heartened to live in this community where I find that coalition easier than perhaps it is in other places. And I regularly see our allies and advocates in other marginalized communities coming and standing up for us, and us coming and standing up for them, and building a voice that is louder together than it would ever be apart. And that is how we do it. That is how we fix it. That is how we fight it. This fight ain't new to really any of us, you know? So unluckily for the folks coming for us, we already have some skill sets around this, and we are ready to deploy them. And times have changed a bit. We're feeling a little bit more empowered than maybe we used to. But I have to say this, for folks who maybe felt a sense of safety not picking a side in the past, those times have changed. You're not going to find any safety in not picking a side anymore. You know? So I really just want to challenge everybody to try to figure out who you are, where your values live. You know, what is it you want to stand for in this world? And if you want to be with us, we welcome you.
Yes. So can I also have us be a little practical, right? Because we, for a couple months, were talking about supporting individuals who were refugees, or who might be impacted by like human trafficking or commercial sexual exploitation. And I'm imagining just that some of the needs and issues that individuals who are more marginalized, right, or vulnerable in our community might be some of the needs that individuals who are sort of political refugees, sort of showing up here looking for asylum and looking for safety, might also be asking for. So can we be practical about you know, what as a community should we be thinking about, and from an organizational perspective, what should we be thinking about? You know, so can we, let's have that advocacy conversation.
Yeah, absolutely. So we are engaged in talks with an organization called Trans Resistance Network that literally finds asylum and housing and placement for our internal displacement refugees. We need hosts. We need people who are willing to open their home for short-term stays for people seeking asylum here in the state of Illinois until they're able to find their own housing and find jobs and, you know, get their kids to school and all that sort of stuff. We literally need housing. And we need housing from people who either have training or are willing to get training, which we help provide in dealing with folks like this who are in crisis, right, when they arrive. We need people willing to hire openly trans, gender diverse, and non-binary people, and commit to having a non-discriminatory and affirming workplace. We need people who are willing to help fund these people's moves if they have nothing, and moves are not cheap. And then we need people willing to come and help us execute our programs on the ground. You know, we get a lot of lovely volunteers from within the LGBTQ plus community. If you're an ally or an advocate, what a wonderful way to show your support, by showing up and doing the grunt work.
Yeah.
Come to our Pride Fest, absolutely, but maybe work a volunteer shift too, so that queer folks can enjoy the Pride Fest. How about that? Right? Little things you can do, little things.
So some practical things, it seems like. And so if I am a part of an organization or a group or maybe even a faith community, and I wanted to help, they should reach out. So we'll make sure that that information is available. And it sounds like there's some advocacy work with, if I'm working at an organization or a company, I could be asking what our policies are, doing some HR advocacy. I could be asking for training so that we can be much more inclusive or culturally responsive. I could ask for a review. I could make sure that my schools are on board. So I'm going to be double checking with what are the school policies, what organizations exist within schools, what are possible responses. So I'm doing that. And it also seems like there could be real practical things around like, household supplies and goods and those kinds of things. And then, what we know about dislocation or marginalization or being in those kind of trauma experiences. I'm imagining that you're also doing some outreach to the mental health community. So if you are a therapist, a clinician, someone out there, and you have experience or are willing to get some additional training around helping people sort of deal with the grief around the marginalization, to deal with the psychological, bullying or those kind of abuses scar the soul in ways that are sustainable, that often can result in things that look like complex trauma. So you're saying, and we need people who can also do family therapy, because this isn't like just an individual journey, it's a family system journey. So if you're a clinician out there, there are lots of roles for you. And you also probably, what I hear is you want the community to be aware that these needs and issues are available. And so just because you can't see it, like many forms of other discrimination or oppression in our community, be aware and also feel validated and affirmed that we're a community of welcoming and belonging, and where we're not that, let's work collectively to sort of be aligned, because there are those places of disconnect, but we want to be our better angels and better selves. Am I missing anything?
You did so well, but you made me remember a couple things.
Okay.
One is that this year we started a small food pantry. We discovered many, if not most, or not maybe, well, most of the food pantries in our community are run by faith groups, and many are affirming. But even being an affirming faith group does not necessarily erase the religious trauma that LGBTQ plus folks have experienced. Yeah. So they may not feel comfortable or safe going into a place of worship to access that. So we do have a small food pantry in the Up Center, and we actually just got a restock yesterday. So folks need stuff, and we have some home goods as well. It's all non-perishable. We do not have refrigeration, but it is staples and food, and anyone can come anytime they need. And there's no limit. And no proof of need. You just simply state that you have the need. We welcome folks. We also welcome folks to donate to that if they have goods they want to donate. Okay. And then training, again, I'm happy. We do it, we deliver it, we give it. I'm also happy to lend our services to evaluating work policies and procedures, consulting on language or changes that might make your environment more affirming. So that's something we're happy to do. It is a holistic approach. It has to be. Yeah. But something I also want to bring up is we don't always realize how much power we have in our personal lives. Mm-hmm. Simply speaking up and saying, yeah, that's not actually funny. Mm-hmm. That's harmful language. It's not okay. What you're saying is factually false, right? Yeah. Simply speaking up in those moments, you have so much power to shape your environment on a one-on-one level. And it doesn't have to be a fight. It doesn't have to be a long conversation. You don't have to have all the facts. You don't have to know everything. But simply stopping when these things are said and done in front of you, and being willing to say, can fundamentally shift.
Absolutely.
Your environment. And if it gets to a point where people are unwilling to shift their language or their behavior around you, wow, do you have power when you say, well, you're not going to be able to spend time with me then. Yeah. If you're going to continue to engage in bullying and insulting and bigotry and discrimination, we're not going to hang out. And that's what it is. And now the choice is yours. Do you want to spend time with me? Then knock it off. If you don't want to spend time with me, fine, done. No loss on my end, because all you do is bring the hate, right? Like the amount of power each individual has. And that is nothing to do with LGBTQ issues.
Absolutely.
That's all of the issues, right?
Of humanity, right? Yeah.
insanity. I mean, I just think like people are feeling more and more empowered to say awful things to each other
Yeah.
with no consequence. And a consequence is somebody going, no, you don't get to say that around me.
Yeah.
It's massively powerful. And that is a very easy way for people to step into their power and impact the world around them.
Absolutely. I love your articulation. And I want to add one thing, and then I'm going to give you closing comments. I also believe, right, and we know this throughout history, that when people are afraid, and change makes people afraid, right? Like it activates a fear response that is a normal human thing. But when you find yourself, if you're someone who sees something that is different or hears something that is different, and it activates your fear response, go, oh, okay, I'm afraid, but then pause, because this is what makes humans humans and not like, snakes. Pause and really like center yourself and ask, like, is it really a threat? Is it a threat that I am making it up? Why am I afraid? Why am I perceiving things this way? Because sometimes it's just different or unfamiliar or uncomfortable, not personal, not an attack on you. And so a lot of times, right, that amygdala, that fear response is abnormal, hyperactivated, and is just responding to difference. And I think, because of COVID and all the changes, lots of people have more of those fears. But I want to always give you permission, as Nicole said, to be a big brain person and to find your higher self. So pause and challenge. And what we know is the more I get to know people, the more I look for commonality, the more I hear your story and connect with you and be curious and open, right? Move beyond the fear, the better I realize like how much we have in common, the better I'm able to see and appreciate and celebrate you. And celebrating you doesn't take away anything from me. It just allows more room for the we. And so I just want to keep reminding people to move into these spaces of change and transformation and not sort of buckle down and kind of do what feels familiar and safe. Because I think that we're being invited. Like you said, like if I'm going to speak boldly, I've also got to be equipped to do that. And that means that I'm open to people and open to process and open to new. And so so I just want to add that. Are there final words that hopefully this conversation, you are doing amazing work, continue to do amazing work, are such a phenomenal resource. I did not realize that you were doing such a heavy lift, because it is very hard to sort of do both the support for people here, listening to the painful stories of people who are navigating through all kinds of adversities and heartbreak, and again, uprooting themselves, uprooting their world and sort of trying to restart. I think about the Great Migration, when people of African descent left the South because of lynching and had to sort of find their way up north. It's how we live in Illinois, and just what that meant. And so the historical and cultural traumas that are embodied in people are sort of ever present in this moment too. So your final words, and thank you for the time. So I'm going to let you do closing words. Do you have anything else you want to add?
I sincerely appreciate you making the space, making the time, making the effort. Back at you on the work y'all do and the heavy lift you all have. It's incredible that we have your resource here in the community. And I regularly recommend you, by the way, to many folks. Yeah, I just say this, our website exists, unitingpride.org. We have a ton of June programming left. We have our Pride Fest in the fall. We have our ongoing social and support groups. If folks want to volunteer, if you are lucky enough to have a little bit of extra money, we are always underfunded. We will absolutely put it back into the community to good use. And then, be open, as you said, right? Be willing to hear what's going on in our community, be willing to stand up about it. And if you want some help to do that, we're here for you.
Absolutely. Yeah. Thank you so much. I really appreciate the time. So be well and look for resources that we'll put in the chat. Bye-bye.
Thanks, Karen. Bye bye.